Ethan Carter adjusted the stiff collar of his waiter's uniform, exhaling slowly as he stood behind the grand marble pillars of the Montclair Hotel's ballroom. Tonight's wedding was the kind of event most people only saw in magazines: towering floral arrangements, glittering chandeliers dripping with crystals, and guests dressed in designer suits and silk gowns. But for Ethan, it was just another shift. He wasn't a guest, or a part of the laughter and music. He was a single father, a man who worked nights to pay school fees, electricity bills, and care for his 7-year-old daughter, Sophie, who waited at home with her worn-out stuffed bunny and a bedtime story he promised to read when he returned. The world inside this ballroom wasn't his. He was only meant to serve, smile, and fade into the background. As the clock struck 8, the bride, Amelia Rousseau, made her entrance, radiant in an ivory gown, arm in arm with her father. Cameras flashed, applause roared, and the orchestra swelled with music. Ethan stepped carefully between tables with a silver tray of champagne glasses balanced in his steady hands. He kept his gaze down, but for a second, his eyes wandered. That's when he saw her. The bride's younger sister, Isabella Rousseau. She stood slightly apart from the crowd, dressed in a soft rose-colored gown that shimmered under the lights. Her smile was gentle but didn't quite reach her eyes, as though she was present but somewhere far away. For the briefest moment, her eyes found his. It wasn't a passing glance, it was as if she saw past his uniform, past the role he played, and straight into the storms he carried. Ethan quickly looked away, reminding himself of his place. He moved to the next table, refilling glasses and offering practiced smiles. But he couldn't shake the strange feeling that something about tonight was different. Isabella didn't mingle much. She refused dances, excused herself from conversations, and kept glancing toward the exit as though waiting for a moment to breathe. Little did Ethan know that before the night ended, she wouldn't just notice him, she would reach for his hand in front of everyone and ask him to dance before it was too late. Ethan tried to stay focused on his work, but the memory of Isabella's distant eyes lingered in his thoughts like a whisper he couldn't ignore. The wedding reception grew louder and livelier, crystal glasses chimed, couples spun gracefully on the marble dance floor, and laughter blended with the orchestra's soft melodies. Yet despite the celebration, Isabella remained withdrawn. She sat alone at the edge of the room, her hands folded in her lap, untouched champagne shimmering in her glass. Ethan passed by her table to refill drinks, determined not to look, but fate had other plans. Their eyes met again. This time, Isabella didn't look away. Instead, she rose from her seat, walked toward him, and softly said, "You look like you don't belong here either." He froze, unsure if he should respond. "I'm just working, ma'am," he murmured, keeping his gaze low. She gave a faint, sad smile. "And I'm just pretending." Before Ethan could understand her words, the orchestra shifted to a slow, gentle tune. Couples drifted to the dance floor, hands clasped, hearts light. Isabella turned to Ethan fully then, her voice barely louder than the music. "Dance with me," she said. He blinked in disbelief. I can't. I'm just a waiter," he replied, glancing nervously toward his supervisor. But Isabella stepped closer, her eyes glistening not with pride, but with quiet desperation. "Please, dance with me before it's too late." Her voice trembled, and something in Ethan's chest tightened. He didn't know what she meant by too late, but her words felt like a plea for help, not an invitation. For a heartbeat, everything stood still, the music, the chatter, even the air. Ethan felt every gaze turn toward them, curious and shocked. Ignoring the whispers around him, he set his tray aside and finally took her hand. Her fingers were cold, delicate, trembling. She led him to the center of the dance floor as if he belonged there. The room quieted except for the soft melody of violins. Ethan's heart pounded, his hands awkward at her waist, but Isabella only whispered, "Just follow me." And beneath the glittering lights, in a world not meant for either of them, they began to dance. As Ethan and Isabella moved slowly across the dance floor, time seemed to stretch into something fragile and unreal. The music wrapped around them like a secret, but the weight of hundreds of eyes pressed heavily against Ethan's back. He could feel whispers rising around the room, curious, shocked, some even disapproving. A waiter dancing with the bride's sister was not part of the evening script. Ethan's pulse raced, every instinct telling him to step away, to disappear back into the shadows where he belonged. But Isabella's hand in his was trembling, her gaze fixed not on the crowd, but on the floor as if she were afraid to look up and face their judgment. "Thank you for not letting go," she whispered, her voice so soft only he could hear it. Ethan swallowed hard. "People are staring," he murmured. Isabella nodded faintly. "Let them. They don't know what it's like to want one moment for yourself." When the song ended, Isabella didn't immediately release his hand. But the moment shattered when her father, Charles Rousseau, approached, his expression dark with restrained fury. "Isabella," he said sharply, his voice cold enough to silence a room, "a word. Now." She hesitated, glancing at Ethan with an apology in her eyes before gently pulling her hand from his. Ethan stepped back, heart pounding, watching as she followed her father toward the balcony, her head bowed slightly like a child being led to punishment. The crowd slowly resumed its chatter, but the atmosphere had changed, now laced with curiosity and tension. Ethan turned to leave, but was stopped by a gentle voice. Amelia, the bride, stood beside him, her eyes calm yet filled with concern. "Don't blame yourself," she said softly. "My sister, she's been fighting something no one else sees." Ethan frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" Amelia glanced toward the balcony where Isabella now stood alone, wiping a tear with the back of her hand. "She hasn't been happy for a long time," Amelia whispered. "And after tonight, things will change for her. I don't know how, but she's scared." Before Ethan could ask more, Amelia stepped away to rejoin her guests, leaving him with more questions than answers. Ethan looked back toward the balcony, where Isabella stood like a beautiful secret about to break, and he knew this night was far from over. Ethan hesitated at the edge of the balcony, unsure whether he had the right to step into a world that clearly wasn't his. Inside, the music continued and guests danced as if nothing had happened, but out here, the night felt heavy with unspoken truths. Isabella stood by the railing, her arms wrapped around herself, shoulders trembling in the cold. "You shouldn't be here," she said softly without turning, her voice fragile like glass. Ethan stepped closer anyway. "You asked me to dance," he replied quietly. "You said, before it's too late." "What did you mean?" Isabella slowly turned toward him, her eyes shimmering under the string lights above them. "After tonight," she whispered, struggling to hold her voice steady, "I won't have a choice anymore. My father has arranged my engagement to a man I don't love. He's twice my age, and it's all for a business deal. Tomorrow, I leave for Paris, with him." Her words fell like stones in Ethan's chest. For a moment, neither spoke. The wind tugged gently at her hair, and tears glistened on her cheeks. "I just wanted one moment that was mine," she said, her voice breaking. "One moment where I chose." Ethan's heart ached, not because he knew her well, but because he understood what it meant to lose control of your own life. "Isabella," he said softly, "you don't have to go. You can say no." She gave a small, sad smile. "People like me don't get to say no." Ethan thought of his daughter, of all the nights he stayed awake to keep their world from falling apart, and he wished he could fix this too. But some things couldn't be fixed with kind words alone. Still, he did the only thing he could. He stepped forward and held out his hand to her, not as a waiter, not as someone beneath her world, but as someone who saw her pain. "Then let this moment be yours. One more dance," he said. Her lips trembled into a fragile smile as she placed her hand in his. Under the quiet moonlight, they danced, not for the crowd, not for tradition, but for themselves. When the song ended and reality crept back in, Isabella whispered, "Thank you, for seeing me." And though they both knew the night would end and their worlds would pull them apart, that dance became a memory neither of them would ever forget, captured in time, before it was too late.